It was Saturday, the 18th of February, 1950. Evening had descended upon the borgata of Primavalle, a sprawling district in the northwestern reaches of Rome, where narrow streets and grey apartment blocks housed the working poor in conditions of considerable hardship. The air carried a familiar sense of coal smoke and damp earth, mingling with the distant sounds of carnival festivities. Gas lamps flickered weakly along Via Lorenzo Litta, casting uncertain shadows upon cobblestones still wet from recent rain. In this quarter, built by fascist planners to house families displaced from the ancient heart of Rome, life proceeded with grim determination. Open sewers ran along certain streets. Public transport remained scarce. The war had ended 5 years previous, yet poverty endured with stubborn persistence. Families crowded into modest dwellings, struggling to procure sufficient bread and coal for their daily sustenance. It was into this landscape the 12-year-old Annarella Bracci, known to all as Annarella, stepped that February evening. She carried an empty bottle and a cloth bag, bound upon a simple errand to purchase coal and cooking oil. The hour approached 7:30. Within 3 hours, she would be missing. Within 13 days, the entire nation would know her name. The mystery of what transpired in those cold hours would divide a community and remain, to this very day, unresolved. Who threw the child into the well whilst she yet lived? Annarella Bracci was born on the 15th of December, 1937. Her parents, Ruggiero Bracci and Marta Fiocchi, had married in 1933, though their union proved troubled from its commencement. Ruggiero laboured as a road mender, earning modest wages through physical toil. Marta had been raised by nuns, her family possessing connections to the papal army, an upbringing that instilled discipline yet failed to prepare her for the hardships that would follow. The Bracci household included 6 children in total. They resided in Via Lorenzo Litta, Lotto 25, Scala L, in the heart of Primavalle. The district itself had been constructed in 1937 under the direction of architect Giorgio Guidi, part of the fascist regime's program to relocate working families from the city centre. Long rows of low apartment buildings stretched across the plateau between Via Aurelia and Via Trionfale, providing shelter of the most utilitarian character. When Italy entered the Second World War on the 10th of June 1940, the family's circumstances deteriorated further. Allied bombing campaigns targeted Rome with increasing frequency, particularly in 1943. Strategic locations suffered extensive damage, and civilian casualties mounted steadily. Many residents fled the bombardment, seeking refuge in less targeted areas. The Bracci family, like countless others, relocated to Primavalle, which lay sufficiently distant from the city centre to offer relative safety. The war's conclusion in 1945 brought no immediate relief. The borgata remained impoverished, its infrastructure inadequate, its population struggling. In 1949, when Annarella had reached the age of 11, Ruggiero departed the household, taking 2 of the younger sons with him. The separation left Marta alone with the remaining children, including Annarella and her elder brother Mariano, who had suffered the amputation of his leg following an accident. Annarella assumed responsibilities beyond her years. She performed household tasks, washed clothing, mended what could be repaired. She accepted small commissions from neighbours, earning a few lire through errands and domestic labour. The child sought to contribute to the family's meagre resources, moving through the streets of Primavalle with quiet determination. She avoided the household when possible, particularly when her mother entertained male visitors who provided money in exchange for favours. By February of 1950, Annarella had developed into a slender girl with dark hair and solemn eyes, her childhood curtailed by necessity and circumstance. The days preceding the 18th of February passed without particular incident, though tensions within the Bracci household had intensified in recent weeks. Ruggiero Bracci had brought formal charges of adultery against his estranged wife, the proceedings scheduled to commence shortly. The accusation required testimony from family members, including Annarella herself. The child had been questioned regarding her mother's conduct, her answers truthful, yet damaging to Marta's position. The mother resented this testimony deeply, creating further strain within an already fractured family. Marta Fiocchi had formed an association with a local man named Adamo Moroni, a street cleaner of middle years and shabby appearance. The relationship attracted neighborhood gossip, whispers exchanged in doorways and markets. Moroni visited the dwelling in Via Lorenzo Litta with some regularity, his presence noted by those who observed the comings and goings of that troubled household. Within the cramped apartment, Mariano Bracci's temperament grew increasingly volatile. His disability prevented gainful employment, forcing him to depend upon his mother and siblings. His frustration manifested in anger, creating an atmosphere of unease. Annarella spent as little time at home as circumstances permitted, preferring the cold streets to the tensions within. The family had become known to their neighbors through these difficulties. Some spoke of them with pity, others with disapproval. The Berlingini family, who resided nearby, occasionally provided small amounts of food or lard when Marta's resources failed entirely. The Cecchini family included a daughter, Anna, who had formed a friendship with Annarella despite the latter's troubled circumstances. Among the family's acquaintances numbered Lionello Egidi, a young man of 25 years who worked as a gardener. He was known locally as Il Biondino due to his fair coloring. Egidi had once resided in the basement rooms of the Bracci dwelling with his wife and small children, establishing familiarity with the family during that period. He was seen about the neighborhood regularly, purchasing provisions, awaiting the omnibus at Largo Federico Borromeo. On the morning of the 18th of February, Annarella rose and attended to her usual tasks. The day proceeded without remarkable incident. By evening, provisions had been depleted. Bread required purchasing. Coal for the stove had been exhausted. There was no oil for cooking. Marta gave her daughter money and specific instructions. Purchase coal, obtain oil or lard if possible, return directly home. The hour approached 7:30 when Annarella departed the dwelling, carrying her empty bottle and cloth bag into the gathering darkness. Annarella proceeded through the streets of Primavalle toward Largo Federico Borromeo, where shops and vendors congregated. The Saturday evening brought modest festivity to the district, carnival providing excuse for gatherings despite the prevailing poverty. At approximately 2000 hours, she encountered her friend Anna Cecchini near the omnibus terminus. The two girls spoke briefly, exchanging pleasantries about the evening's activities. Shortly thereafter, Annarella was observed speaking with Lionello Egidi near a chestnut vendor's brazier. The exchange was witnessed by several persons. Egidi, it was later reported, gave the child 10 lire to purchase roasted chestnuts, which she accepted gratefully. She then proceeded to a coal merchant located along the present Via Niccolo Albergati, where she purchased her mother's required fuel. From there she walked to the dwelling of the Berlingini family, seeking cooking oil. The household possessed none to spare, but provided a small quantity of lard, which Annarella accepted with thanks. From this point, accounts become uncertain. The child was not seen returning to Via Lorenzo Litta. Hours passed. By late evening, Marta grew concerned, then alarmed. She walked through the neighboring streets, calling her daughter's name, peering into doorways, questioning those she encountered. None had seen the girl. She knocked upon Lionello Egidi's door, requesting his assistance in the search. He agreed readily, joining two others in examining the area surrounding Torrevecchia. Though their efforts proved fruitless, the following morning Marta attended the Primavalle commissariat to report her daughter's disappearance. The duty officer received her statement with limited interest. Children absented themselves regularly, particularly during Carnival. The girl would likely return when the festivities concluded. Marta's protests went largely unheeded. The constabulary, occupied with demonstrations and unrest throughout Rome, devoted scant resources to the matter. Days elapsed. Ruggiero Bracci, learning of his daughter's disappearance, attended the police station on the 23rd of February, demanding action. His emotional appeal, combined with mounting pressure from Primavalle residents, finally prompted official investigation. Officers began systematic inquiries. The family came under particular scrutiny. Marta was questioned extensively regarding her relationship with her daughter, her activities on the evening of the 18th, her knowledge of the child's whereabouts. A wealthy baron, moved by the case, offered a reward of 300,000 lire for information, leading to the discovery of Annarella's fate. Newspapers began reporting the disappearance. Public interest intensified, yet the child remained missing, her location unknown, her fate a source of mounting dread throughout the district. On the evening of the 3rd of March, 13 days following the disappearance, Lionello Bracci discovered his granddaughter's body. The location was an irrigation well in the locality known as La Nebbia, between Via Torrevecchia and the present Via Cogoletto, then open countryside distant from the populated quarter. The well measured 13 meters in depth. Lionello later informed authorities that a dream had guided his search, claiming he heard Annarella's voice calling to him through sleep. Whether this account represented truth or convenient fabrication remained uncertain, though it secured him the baron's promised reward. Officers arrived swiftly upon notification. The body was recovered with considerable difficulty, given the well's depth and narrow aperture. Annarella was transported to the mortuary for examination. The autopsy, conducted by the examining physician, revealed grim particulars. The child had sustained 4 puncture wounds to the occipital region of the skull, inflicted by a sharp implement. 2 defensive wounds marked her right hand, indicating she had attempted to ward off the assault. The weapon appeared to have been a wooden stake fitted with a nail, subsequently found near the scene, torn from nearby fencing. Most distressing was the finding that water filled the lungs. Annarella had been thrown into the well while still alive, though gravely injured. She had drowned in that terrible darkness, alone and suffering. The advanced state of decomposition prevented determination of whether criminal assault of an intimate nature had occurred prior to death. Her clothing was recovered from the well bottom, the skirt and undergarments removed or displaced. The coal and lard she had obtained on the 18th were discovered beside the well, confirming she had completed her errands before the attack. The bottle that had contained the lard lay broken nearby. These items established the crime scene's location and timing with reasonable certainty. If you are finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now, let us continue. Following the autopsy findings, suspicion focused intensely upon Lionello Egidi. He had been among the last persons to see Annarella alive. He possessed knowledge of the Torrevecchia area. Previous complaints had been lodged against him regarding inappropriate conduct toward young girls of similar age. On the evening of the 3rd of March, whilst descending from an omnibus at Ponte Vittorio Emanuele, he was arrested by waiting officers. He was conveyed to the questura for interrogation, where he would remain detained for 7 days, under conditions that would later prove controversial. Lionello Egidi endured extensive questioning during his week of detention. The methods employed by the questura officers would subsequently become the subject of fierce debate and legal reform. On the 10th of March, after prolonged interrogation, Egidi confessed to the murder. According to his statement, he had encountered Annarella that evening after she obtained the chestnuts he had purchased for her. He claimed to have invited her to walk with him toward the countryside. There, he alleged, he made advances which she resisted vigorously. She began to scream. In panic, he struck her repeatedly with the nail-fitted stake, then threw her body into the irrigation well. Days later, when brought before the examining magistrate, Egidi retracted his confession entirely. He declared it had been obtained through violence and coercion. He exhibited facial bruising, swollen features, split lips. He claimed officers had beaten him severely, applied nerbait to the soles of his feet, forced salt into his mouth, until he could endure no more. His family, visiting him in custody, had not recognized him initially due to the extent of his injuries. The confession, he maintained, was false, extracted through torture when he could withstand the suffering no longer. The trial commenced in late 1951. The proceedings generated enormous public interest, newspapers providing detailed coverage of testimony and evidence. The prosecution presented the confession, witness statements placing Egidi with Annarella that evening, and his previous complaints regarding conduct toward young girls. The defense argued the confession's inadmissibility due to the circumstances of its procurement, presented his wife's testimony that he had been home throughout the evening, and emphasized the lack of physical evidence directly connecting him to the crime scene. On the 18th of January, 1952, the Corte d'Assise di Roma delivered its verdict, assolto per insufficienza di prove, acquitted for insufficiency of evidence. The courtroom erupted with mixed reactions. Many in the Primavalle community viewed Egidi as a scapegoat, a poor man victimized by authorities seeking swift resolution. Others remained convinced of his guilt despite the acquittal. The judge's decision acknowledged the troubling circumstances surrounding the confession's extraction. The physical evidence, whilst suggestive, proved insufficient for conviction. The witness testimony established proximity, but not culpability. Without the coerced confession, the prosecution's case collapsed. Egidi departed the courthouse a free man, though his reputation remained permanently tarnished. The true circumstances of Annarella Bracci's death remained, officially, undetermined. The funeral of Annamaria Bracci occurred on the 8th of March, 5 days following the discovery of her remains. The municipality of Rome funded the proceedings, the family possessing insufficient resources for such expenses. A white carriage drawn by matched horses bore the small coffin through the streets. The procession drew an extraordinary crowd, contemporary newspapers estimating attendance exceeded 100,000 persons. Romans emerged from every quarter of the city, the working poor of the borgate joining citizens of means in collective mourning. High officials attended, the prefect, senior police administrators, municipal authorities. The famous entertainer Wanda Osiris sent a cross-shaped arrangement of lilac bluepins. The artist Walter Merlino created an illustration for La Domenica del Corriere, depicting the funeral, which appeared prominently on that publication's cover. The prominent journalists Curzio Malaparte and Pietro Ingro wrote extensive commentary in Il Tempo and Lo Unità, respectively, each interpreting the tragedy through their particular political perspective. The case had transcended mere criminality, becoming symbolic of broader social failures, class division, and institutional inadequacy. The nuns of the convent of the Ursulines, located near the church of Santa Maria Assunta e San Giuseppe in Primavalle, reported they had heard a child's voice cry out on the night of the 18th of February. The voice called "Aiuto, mamma suore," followed by a scream of pain. The sisters had investigated but found nothing, dismissing it as carnival mischief. This testimony haunted the proceedings, suggesting Annarella had called for help that went unanswered. Annarella was interred at the Cimitero del Verano, in the family chapel of Raniero Marsili, a benefactor who provided the burial place. A commemorative plaque marks her resting place, noting her as victim of violence. Marta Fiocchi did not attend the funeral, remaining in custody whilst investigators pursued theories of maternal involvement. The legal aftermath proved equally complex. In June 1954, Lionello Egidi was arrested following allegations from an 8-year-old girl named Anna Mancini, who accused him of misconduct during a rural festival. In November 1955, an appeals court convicted him of both Annarella's murder and the Mancini assault, sentencing him to 26 years for the former and 3 years for the latter. However, in January 1957, the Court of Cassation overturned this conviction, determining the appeals court had been improperly influenced by the Mancini case when reconsidering the murder charge. The 14th of December 1957 saw Egidi definitively acquitted of Annarella's murder. He returned to Primavalle, where opinion remained bitterly divided between those proclaiming his innocence and those convinced of his guilt. In 1961, he faced new charges regarding an 8-year-old boy receiving a prison sentence. He was released in 1966 and lived obscurely thereafter, reportedly working as an informal parking attendant. The Bracci family's subsequent fate proved tragic. Mariano died in December 1950 from lung cancer, aged merely 17 years. Teresina, another sibling, died shortly thereafter. Marta Fiocchi survived until May 1955, dying of cardiac arrest. Her mind reportedly deteriorated significantly in those final years. The case prompted significant legal reform in Italy. The treatment of Lionello Egidi was detained beaten until unrecognizable to his relations, held 7 days without legal representation, led to modification of the Codis Rocco. The period of fermo de polizia giudiziaria was reduced from 7 days to 48 hours, with mandatory notification to legal counsel required. One child's death thus altered procedures affecting all subsequent detainees. In 2011, a public park near Via Lorenzo Litta was dedicated to Annarella's memory. In 2017, a mural was painted at the corner of Via Pio IX and Via Silvestro II, not distant from Pineta Sacchetti, depicting the child who became, inadvertently, a symbol of vulnerability and neglect. Her case inspired the filmmaker Carlo Lizani's I Margini della Metropoli in 1952 and Luchino Visconti's documentary Appunti su un fatto di cronaca in 1951. The poet Vasco Pratolini provided commentary for Visconti's work. Today, the well where Annarella drowned beneath a petrol station. Via Lorenzo Litta has been rebuilt, modern apartments replacing the original borgata structures. Yet in Primavalle, elderly residents still caution children against speaking with strangers, invoking Annarella's name as warning. The file remains in the archives of the Roman judiciary, bound and sealed, containing witness statements, autopsy reports, and a confession obtained through means that violated every principle of justice. No one was ever convicted. The question persists through decades. Who threw the child into the well whilst she yet lived? The answer lies somewhere in those faded documents, or perhaps in memory's shadows, where truth and silence maintain their eternal contest.